gonna wait. Sean's got to bring up a couple quick slides for me. We're a little bit off schedule, but we're going to get caught right back up here. We had one of our survivors who was going to travel in, was not able to make it today. So I'm going to just recap a little bit of information before we get our first three survivors. Our three survivors today are Scott Green over here, who I met through our efforts at Rock from the Heart. I found him in a support group online. Mike Sylvester from Duluth, who has got an incredible story of post-dissection survival. I found him because I saw an article in the Duluth Tribune when I was just looking for stories on aortic disease, and we connected through the online. And then our last one, Aaron Frederick, who I met just today. We met again online through support groups. So Jeff Harder started an online support group on Facebook, the Thoracic Ascending Aortic Dissection Support Group, and that's how a lot of us connected. And he's actually collected some pretty cool stats while Sean pulls that up here. Before we do that, I just want to remind people, on the tables are some note cards. So if you've had questions that have come up, please be writing those down, because before we start the QA in a little bit, it'll help us a lot if we have those on. And I think, Gretchen, you were going to help us maybe collect those, and maybe somebody else can. So I just want to remind you of that. But this is Jeff's map. He's got a map, and every one of those red dots is somebody who is in that support group who is either living with pre or post-surgery with a thoracic ascending aortic aneurysm. The green dots are where people have had their surgeries. And yes, I've got Minneapolis Heart. I think I put a big star and a great big heart and saying these guys are awesome and they're the best. So now which do I click here? This to click? This is an informal survey that I did. One reason I reached out to the valve disease people is because so many people that have the thoracic ascending aorta, that there's some valve involvement as well. And it was all foreign to us when Pete was first diagnosed. So we wanted to talk about that, but I just asked people, which valve did you get? How many had a valve? Informal. We looked at how many got a pacemaker. This was one thing that Pete and I did not expect, as he calls it, that bonus surgery. And we toured Abbott Labs yesterday. And Sean, can you flip over to that picture really quick? Are you able to? Am I able to? Oh, you're going to make me be technical? Yeah, he'll come out. I'll just talk while he does that. But I just wanted to find out how many people who have aneurysms also have valve involvement. And we found that it was pretty high. And how many had them done at the same time? How many had the valve done first, maybe the aneurysm later, or vice versa? And it was really interesting to see those numbers. I'd never heard of a bicuspid valve in 2015. What's that, a unicycle, bicycle, tricycle? I knew it meant two. That was all I knew. So I've learned a lot in the last 4 years. But yesterday, I can't even explain what an incredible experience it was. Abbott Labs told us that 5% of the St. Jude Regent valves are made from start to finish in Minneapolis. 95%. The initial process is done here, and then they are done in Puerto Rico. Well, I gave them Pete's serial number, and they found the people. So we walked in, we went downstairs, and they were standing there, all of these wonderful, beautiful women who had touched his valve before it went in him, and there they are there. Each one of them, that's the song that we did. Each one of them put their head to Pete's chest and got to listen to the ticking of his St. Jude Regent mechanical valve, the sound of life. And being, if you know, Pete's a musician, he's not just a musician, he's a drummer. So having a pacemaker and a ticking mechanical valve, you can about imagine that his timing is always on. Okay, and then back to the slide, yeah. And I work in technology in my regular business, so I'm nervous today. It's been a really big week, but yesterday was something else, and I was just so thrilled to be able to have that opportunity. Pete doesn't cry very often, but he did. His friend Becky, who he's known for many years, came with us. His daughter was with us, and it was just an incredible moment to see how those valves are made. They had the little valves that they make for babies, infants, and they told us how they can do that, and they can make one in 5 hours. If there's an infant that needs a valve, it's so tiny. They rally the troops, they bring everybody together, and within 5 hours they can have that valve done. I couldn't believe it. That was incredible. So just to go quick through the last slides, these are where the people who are in that particular support group are located at. Raise your hand if you are not from Minnesota and you're in the room today. So we've got something pretty incredible. We're bringing people from around the country to learn more about aortic disease. He had just some quick stats about the group. I thought it was interesting that 30% of the members have a bicuspid valve. 2 had Marfan's and 1 Loeys-Dietz. He took some stats on who opted, what kind of valve, tissue, mechanical. A lot of confusion between what to get, tissue or mechanical. So many questions. How do I decide? For Pete, it was easy. He goes, I don't want to do this again. So I plan to live a long time. Give me the one and done. Thank you. And so he chose the mechanical, and he's been very happy with it. A lot of questions about blood thinners. You know, does your life end? Well, you talk to a lot of people who are living with it, and they're doing just fine. So then, again, just more stats. And that's all we have for that. So I kind of ran through that really quick, but I really wanted to share that story about meeting the people who made the aortic valve. It really meant a lot to us, but apparently it meant just as much to them to see that the work they're doing is truly saving lives. And here's this living, breathing, you know, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there he was, and with his valve taken away. So our first survivor, Scott, is going to come. Again, I met him online. We met for lunch. He has an incredible story. He's a young guy who has a new valve. So, Scott, thank you.
Is it all right if I shut this laptop a little bit? All right. As Amy said, we met on an online support group. If you'd have told me a year ago that I would be standing up here on stage talking about my story and open heart surgery, I'd have laughed at you, no doubt about it. But like I said, my name is Scott Green, and unbeknownst to me, for 37 years, I was born with a bicuspid aortic valve. How it all kind of began was the beginning of last year. It's basically at the top of my game in life. Happily married. My wife is seated right over there. 2 kids. We have a 2-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter. And I was also in the midst of being rather successful in a small family contracting business. But little did I know at the time that how close I was to organ failure due to severe regurgitation and an ejection fraction in the low 30s from my bicuspid valve basically blowing apart. And what I know even less of was what all of that meant. Backtrack just a little bit further. In November of 2018, so just a couple months prior to my diagnosis, I had gone in to have a DOT exam done. For our company, we have some commercial vehicles, and so you have to go in for routine physicals, and you get basically a health card. Mostly routine physical stuff, nothing major. Measure your toes, or measure your waist, touch your toes, turn your head and cough, and get told your blood pressure is a little high. But this time, something was different. The doc performing it said he heard a murmur. I had heard that term before, but I knew nothing of what a murmur was. So I did what any logical male would do, and I ignored it. We would need a whole separate symposium just to discuss the male pride, ego, and denial complex that leads up to those kind of decisions. Our family had already been hit with my brother's diagnosis. He was detected to have a tumor inside one of his kidneys actually at the same time, and he was due for surgery to remove the growth. Our attention was all on him, and there was no way I wanted to add to the worry. It's later determined after removal that he did indeed have stage 1 kidney cancer, but it was successfully removed, and he got his whole kidney replaced back in him, and he's 100%. Meanwhile, I started having strange symptoms, and I can only say, looking back like over my whole lifetime, the only thing that I can maybe put my finger on that might have stuck out as a symptom of having a bicuspid aortic valve was ocular migraines. If you guys know what those are, it's a bunch of squiggly lines in your eyes that come up when you're stressed or under pressure, and then they go away. There's no pain in the brain, there's no headache or anything like that, but I've had it my whole life. I never knew what it was until later on when I found out that it sometimes is related to having a bicuspid valve as well. But anyway, back to the symptoms. And instead of one day, I was scheduled to go to Iowa for some work, and I basically started driving to town, and I felt completely off. My heart was pounding. I was sweating, yet kind of cold at the same time. And I called the nurse's line, and they told me to go to urgent care. So I went to urgent care and found out that my blood pressure was topping 170 over 110. The doctor also heard a very profound murmur, and at urgent care, they told me to follow or find a cardiologist, basically. I hadn't been to a doctor in years. Rather healthy, no indication of anything. So, like I said, we'd need a whole separate symposium. I found one in network at the St. Cloud Heart and Vascular Center. Our initial consultation was very brief and straight to the point. He basically said, you have a murmur. Probably from a BAV. No big deal. Some people live with it most of their life, and some people later on need it replaced. And he even sold me on the idea that later on they can just shoot something up my groin, and it's relatively easy. I was relieved. I sensed nothing urgent in my doctor's demeanor, so life was back to normal. I had an echo 2 weeks later that he had scheduled on March 8th of 2019. It was a late Friday afternoon visit. I thought it would be a really good idea to bring my daughter, you know, fun idea, get her out right before a big snowstorm was coming. And we had sat through some echoes before while my wife was pregnant, and so they're typically simple, painless, and the person performing them really doesn't say anything. But I made a huge mistake by watching the screen. Sorry, I lost my... Once the person performing the echo zeroed in on my particular valve, I could tell something was off. I have a mechanical background, and I know how check valves work. And basically, they allow the flow of liquid one direction, and then after the flow of liquid is done, the vacuum pressure helps close it. That's not what I saw on the screen. I basically saw two flaps of tissue. One of them was barely just going back and forth, maybe about 45 degrees, and the other one was out over here, flailing in the wind like a flag. I got a little bit nervous, but the echo tech, or the person performing the echo, as you know, they do not say anything. But she knew. I left with my daughter, not sure how I felt, but we had other plans for the day, which included going to the pet store and looking at toys. So we get to the other side of town, and just as we pull into the parking lot, 4:30 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was the head nurse practitioner for the cardiologist that I had seen. Her name was Angie. What she said after introducing herself will occupy me for the rest of my life. Scott, your valve has completely failed, and you will need urgent open heart surgery to correct this. Open heart surgery? I'm 37. So my mind started cueing the 7 stages of grief. I just so happened to jump past the first few and landed right into denial. Denial didn't work with Angie, so then I went next for bargaining, which she immediately countered with, I personally don't even recommend you taking any additional time to get a second opinion because you are nearing the critical stages. All the while, my daughter's patience is draining because we are parked right outside of the pet store. Me, on the other hand, I'm frozen in fear. And Angie then tells me that the urgency of her phone call this late in the day on a Friday was to inform me not to shovel any snow or do any strenuous activity as I am in heart failure. Well, my daughter and I, we did make it through the pet store. My mind was somewhere else, no doubt about it. But we still had to drive home. And when we got home and I entered the house, my wife was up in the kitchen preparing dinner. I still remember it was a skillet with some steak and vegetables, and I just stood in back of her while she was cooking. You see, I still hadn't thought of a good way to tell her, and so I just let it out. While her back was towards me, I couldn't look her in the face, and I didn't want to interrupt her, so I just blurted out, I need urgent open heart surgery. All I remember was her freezing while still holding the spatula. It seemed as if forever until she turned around to look at me, and I don't blame her. Our little world was about to be turned upside down. I felt like a dead man walking. I had an angiogram scheduled for the following Wednesday, and after those results, we would know when and what kind of procedure was necessary. Me being of my analytical mind, I read everything I could for the next few days and completely ignored the nurse's advice to stay off the internet. Tissue or mechanical? Will I be on blood thinners? To tick or not to tick? That was the question. One night, while playing Legos in my daughter's room, I was talking to her about it. After telling her all about my choices and impending surgery, she stopped fidgeting with her Legos and looked up at me and said, "Daddy, who cares if you tick? At least you won't have to be opened up again." Done deal for me. In that moment, she helped me make the biggest decision of my life so far, all while playing over Legos. I don't know who said it, but somebody said if you ever need the most honest advice, ask a child. Fast forward, I had my surgery March 18th of last year at 1 p.m. in the afternoon at the St. Cloud Hospital. It was a complete success. Folks from Minnesota will appreciate this. I was on the heart and lung bypass machine for 92.5 minutes, and I was out of the OR in under 3 hours. I still remember waking up in ICU, or at least finally becoming cognitive, as I was later told by my wife that I had a few attempts at speaking while still partially sedated, and it didn't go well. But my first memory was actually hearing the sound of my new valve. Even with all the ambient noise going on around me, all the equipment, the monitors, and everything, I still heard my new valve ticking. It was a gentle sound, almost like a little maraca. It was like a ch, ch, ch. I just sat in there for a few moments to kind of reel in the moment, and because I knew as soon as I told the nurses or made any sort of indication that I was awake, that when you're in the ICU, they don't want you there. They want to get you stable, get you out, and move you to a different room. And I just kind of wanted to enjoy it before everything got too chaotic. I was going to talk a little bit, like I felt going into it that I'm kind of have the Captain Hook syndrome, where if I heard a ticking clock, like I can hear something across the room if it's making noise. I pull batteries out of it. Like I was so scared of getting a mechanical valve, but it's actually peaceful. So thankfully that was not an issue for me. So like I say, I took the time to appreciate this medical marvel, and then I let them know I was awake and that I was thirsty and that my lips were very, very chapped. I had very little pain. It was more of a soreness in my shoulders and back. I felt even better the next day once the tubes came out. I could move more freely. You could get your arms out without the feeling of that. For the survivors and anybody that is on hold, plug your ears. But those corrugated tubes going up underneath your ribs are they're a little cumbersome, but it is not that bad. Once they came out, I could take deep breaths. On my third day post-op, I was given my first shower. I was still covered in the iodine. I had sticky patches everywhere, and I bet I stunk. My wife actually kicked the nurses out of the room with their permission and helped me to bathe. I bet I stood in there for 45 minutes. I laughed, I cried, and I was just beyond happy to have a lot of this in the rearview mirror and on to recovery. Thank you for that, babe. I was sent home that Friday, 4 days after having my chest opened up, my heart stopped, a faulty valve removed, and a new carbon fiber and titanium valve inserted. Then my heart was stitched up and restarted, sternum fused back together with a metal plate and baling wire, and I was sent home. This is utterly remarkable. Just think about that for a moment. To have that sort of medical procedure on a Monday and then sent home on a Friday, to this day, I still can't fathom that that is even possible. If I'd been born a few generations earlier, my diagnosis would have been followed up with an estimated time to be alive. I had a strong recovery. Cardiac rehab was very beneficial. It allowed me to regain my confidence in my body again, all while being monitored by professionals. However, I got a lot of strange looks when I was there, almost as if I wasn't part of the club. almost as if a person needed an AARP membership to get in. Because twice a week while I was there, I got to listen to all the regulars debate over which show to have on, Gunsmoke or Bonanza. After my physical recovery was determined to be successful, the lesser spoken of delayed effects of trauma began to set in, as Randy was just talking about himself. I felt great physically and for the most part mentally as well until exactly July 2nd. Almost 3.5 months after my surgery, I woke up one morning to what felt like being hit by a truck. I thought something was medically wrong. My muscles cramped up, my strength faded, and my heart was pounding out of my chest, harder than I could remember. I believed that the entirety of my situation had finally caught up with me. Panic, fear, doubt, every day for what felt like weeks on end. I had days I couldn't even get out of bed. And if I did get out of bed, I made it to the couch. And I was very scared. My body was so tense, I was actually getting dizzy from it. And there's not a real easy way to climb back out of that. But I went in, got the doctors to look at me again, make sure everything was okay. And basically, they threw out the word anxiety. I've probably always been an anxious individual, but this increased it. And so what I did was began to research and learn how to handle and heal from such trauma. If your brain tells you to stay in bed, the best thing is don't. Get up. Go outside. Just begin taking those small steps forward. Some days you'll make more progress than others. Some days you won't. But I soon realized that what I was experiencing was the fear and all the anxiety that had been laid dormant and was now creeping up like a thief in the night. And I was determined to not let it grow roots. I heard it written somewhere that recovery is on the opposite side of fear. Now, nearly 11 months later, I still contend with small bouts of unwarranted anxiety. But I realize that as strange as it may sound, I am actually grateful for this experience and everything that came with it. Open heart surgery has the potential to change you to the core. It'll give you an entirely new perspective on everything in your life and make you cherish what is truly most important, that being the ones that you love and the ones who love you. It is not something that I would wish upon anyone, yet lately I find myself feeling grateful for the experience. As I close, I just want to say a big thank you to the entire medical world who performs these miracles daily. You guys, when you're a 37-year-old father at the time with 2 small kids, it's not just surgery. It is literally a miracle. And to the brilliant people designing these state-of-the-art bionic parts to replace our genetically weakened ones, thank you as well. Thank you to the nurses and caregivers who work all hours of the day and night, ensuring our comfort and recovery, and to the spouses who hold our hands, calm our fears, and wipe our tears. Thank you.